Good evening. On behalf of Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts, the El Paso International Music Foundation, and Austin Music Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to Part 2 of Monetizing Your Music. Funding for tonight's program and TALA's ongoing services is generously provided by Texas Commission on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, Mid-America Arts Alliance, and the City of Austin Economic Development Department. Our partners tonight have a common goal of elevating musicians in their respective cities of Austin and El Paso. If you're not familiar, you really need to check out the El Paso International Music Foundation and the Austin Music Foundation. If you live in El Paso or Austin, make sure you become acquainted with these wonderful organizations. If you live elsewhere in Texas, I'd recommend keeping track of their activities for online content that you would be able to access from any location. I know they'd welcome your participation. I'd like to take a minute or two to tell you a little bit about Texas Accountants and Lawyers for the Arts in case you're joining us for the first time or you're wondering what else we do other than these webinars. We offer pro bono legal and accounting services, which means free of charge, to individual artists and arts-related nonprofit organizations from all disciplines. We also have a partnership with the USPTO, the Patent and Trademark Office, and we may be able to help inventors file a patent. What can we help you with? We can help you with copyrights and trademarks. We can help you with contract drafting, including any type of performance agreement, recording agreement, gallery agreements. We can do nonprofit incorporation. We can do just about anything if it's related to your artistic practice or your career in the arts. What we're unable to help with are family law, criminal law. Unfortunately, we cannot get you out of jail, personal injury, and we do not litigate or file bankruptcy. But if you do have anything in relation to your art, you have a legal question, an accounting question, give us a call and we can determine if you may be eligible for services. If you're wondering if you are eligible or not, there's just a couple of qualifications. The first one being you must be a Texas resident, and the second one being our financial qualification. And this is based on your adjusted gross income each year. If you're single, for instance, you have to make under $40,000 to be able to enter our program and receive pro bono or free assistance from an accountant or an attorney. If there's two people in your household, that number is a little bit under $55,000, and it goes up from there. If you're wondering if you fit in those financial parameters, there's a grid on our website, and you can look at it at your leisure and see if you think you may be eligible for TALA. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer your questions via email or give us a call. Once you have certified that you're financially qualified, you can ask as many questions as you'd like for up to a year if you're a nonprofit organization or an individual artist. If you are receiving patent services with us, then it's basically one patent per application for our patent program. There's a small fee to participate. That's $75 annually for individual artists and $250 annually for nonprofits. And again, that covers an entire year of services that you can request from our volunteer attorneys and accountants. And if you're an inventor, that fee is $100 per filing. That ends my short presentation there. I just wanted to say our next event coming up that anyone can attend regardless of your financial situation is on August 2nd. It's our Arts Legal Line. You can call the two numbers anytime between 5:30 and 7:30 and talk to one of our volunteer attorneys about your personal needs. So if there's something on your mind, you have any questions for tonight, just anything really that you'd like help with, please call us and we'll certainly try to get your questions answered. So I think we're going to go on to the reason why we're all here. Just first, a little bit of housekeeping. If you have a question for tonight, please write that in the chat feature. And as a note, while you can watch on our YouTube channel tonight's presentation, you must be logged into a personal YouTube account to use the chat feature. So tonight's presentation and speaker is Gwen Seal. Gwen's an attorney in Austin, Texas, with the office of Mike Tillison and Associates, and her primary practice is entertainment law. She's a graduate of Austin College and SMU Dedman School of Law. She's been a tele-volunteer. She served on our board. She now serves as a consultant to us and makes sure that we're up to speed on current trends and provides high-quality information and consult to artists and musicians through our organization. She's published numerous articles, and she's provided education for attorneys at our state bar, and she's particularly knowledgeable concerning digital distribution and current royalty structures, which she's going to cover some about tonight. We're thrilled she's here, and I'm going to turn it over to Gwen.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Welcome everyone to Digital Distribution and Making Money from Your Sound Recordings. Now, as Elisa noted, this is part 2 of our Monetizing Your Music series. So if you have not checked out part 1 yet, part 1 discusses music publishing and getting money from your songs. So if you haven't watched that, go check that out after this, because we also spend a lot of time talking about social media monetization in that as well. So some topics that we're going to cover tonight. We're going to begin by just talking about copyright as it relates to sound recordings and distribution. From there, we're going to then move on to where you need to plug yourself in as an artist in order to receive the royalties that you are owed. From there, we're then going to move on to the terms and features of the major distribution aggregators and which ones might make the most sense for you depending upon your particular needs. And from there, we will then end with the mechanics of monetization on social media pertaining to sound recordings. Copyright terminology. So copyright protects original works of authorship fixed in a tangible medium of expression. In the music realm, there are 2 distinct copyrights. On the one hand, you have the musical composition, in other words, the song. And then you have the separate copyright, which is the sound recording, also referred to as the master. This is the copyright that we're going to be discussing today. A sound recording is a recording of a song. So let's say that you record yourself singing and playing guitar. Guess what? You have a sound recording copyright. Or let's say that your band goes into the studio and records a song. That's a sound recording copyright. So you as the performer who recorded yourself singing and playing guitar on that sound recording, you are the artist. And absent some other agreement that says otherwise, you are also the record label, which is the party that does the business in connection with the sound recording. And in the band example, the performers on a sound recording are all the artist. And absent some sort of agreement that says otherwise, will also jointly own the copyright in that sound recording. So before we dive into distribution and getting into all of the various aggregators, I think it's helpful to just briefly touch on the role of a distributor versus the role of a record company. So it is worth noting that there are just a variety of different ways by which agreements with record companies and agreements with distributors are structured. And because of the amount of unique variations, I'm not going to spend much time talking about this area, just because that would add another hour to 2 hours to this webinar. And I'm sure you don't want to hear me rant for that long. So in other words, we're just going to focus on some of the broad differences between a record company and a distributor. So a record company usually is going to be the party that is maybe financing the production of the recordings, or and is also financing the distribution and the promotion of the recordings, maybe also to music videos that correspond with those sound recordings. The record company is going to be providing distribution services to the various digital platforms out there, and might also be providing some physical distribution services as well. Physical distribution being like CDs, vinyl records. In the event that the record company is actually paying for the production of the recordings, in that case, the record company is probably, in accordance with the agreement, going to own the copyright in those recordings. if the record company isn't actually financing the production of the recordings, it might be more structured like an exclusive license, whereby for a certain period of time, the record company has the exclusive rights to go out and distribute and exploit those recordings. Note that with recording agreements, a lot of the time, these are agreements whereby the artist is providing exclusive recording services to the label. And those exclusive recording services being tied to maybe a term of years or album cycles. A record company would hopefully, particularly if we're talking about like major labels or like mid-sized labels, have a lot of connections out there and have the ability to go out and effectively pitch recordings for like placements, playlists, and the like. They'll be the party that is negotiating deals pertaining to the recordings. And finally, they'll be collecting royalties and paying out royalties that are owed to the artist. Now, on the other hand, you have the distributor. And a distributor is probably not going to own the copyright in the recordings. If you get a just distribution deal whereby the distributor is not paying for the recording costs, things like that, and you for some reason see that the distributor would own the copyright in the sound recordings, that's a red flag. But ultimately, a distributor is going to be distributing the recordings to the various digital platforms, might be also offering physical distribution services as well. Distributors might also provide some marketing services, promotional services to really market and get those recordings out there. And we'll be collecting and paying out royalties that are owed to the artist. Now, understand that aggregators do fall under the distributor umbrella, and really their roles are to just distribute the recordings to the digital platforms and collect and pay out royalties owed to the artist. Now let's talk about sound recording rights and royalties. So on the sound recording side, you have artist royalties, and these royalties pertain back to the distribution right under copyright, which is the right to distribute a sound recording. So when sound recordings are sold in physical format, like CDs, vinyl records, or available via download, or can be streamed, artist royalties are owed to the artist. Now, who pays these royalties? It's either going to be record company or streaming platforms. Now, how do you get paid these royalties? If you are signed with a label, that label is going to collect and pay out these royalties. If you've engaged a distributor, the distributor will be performing that role. Or if you've signed up with an aggregator and you're using an aggregator service, that aggregator will be paying out your artist royalties pertaining to the sound recording. Now, who sets these rates? In the streaming world, the streaming services have various agreements in place with like the major labels and aggregators and things like that. And those agreements are negotiated and the rates according to those agreements are negotiated. You also have the digital public performance royalty, which pertains to the right to publicly perform a sound recording by means of a digital audio transmission. So who pays these royalties? Note that only non-interactive streaming platforms pay these digital public performance royalties. When I say non-interactive streaming platforms, I'm talking about platforms whereby you as the user are not actively choosing what music you're listening to at a given instant. So think here like Pandora or SiriusXM or Music Choice. I just like to bundle that all up into digital radio. It's just a lot easier to refer to as that. Now, how do you get paid these royalties? Artists, producers, and sound recording owners collect these royalties through Sound Exchange. Now, who sets this rate? The Copyright Royalty Board sets this rate. Now, I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of the Copyright Royalty Board because, again, that would just add hours to this presentation, and I'm sure you all don't want to hear me rant about the Copyright Royalty Board. So in the most simplest of terms, essentially the government sets this rate. Now, if you remember back to the webinar from 2 weeks ago on the publishing side, you'll note that the public performance royalties that are available on the sound recording side are only payable from digital radio. And it's important to point out that the US is one of only a few countries Other countries include North Korea, Iran, and China, that do not pay artists a performance royalty from terrestrial radio broadcasts of sound recordings. And just understand that there is current legislation in Congress which would close this loophole. And this legislation is called the American Music Fairness Act. And Tala actually did a webinar on the American Music Fairness Act back in, I think, January with Sean Glover from Sound Exchange, Chris Castle, Tierney Johnson, who is a local Austin artist and producer, and myself. So if you want to learn more about the American Music Fairness Act, you can check out that video on the Tala YouTube channel. Now, I want to bring up a term that I find a lot of people just aren't really familiar with. They hear it, just refer to it, not really knowing what it means. The term neighboring rights. So neighboring rights are income rights that relate to public performances of sound recordings in many countries across the world. So throughout the world, the right that Sound Exchange deals with would be referred to as a neighboring right. But again, as I mentioned, in just about every other country, this right also extends out to public performance royalties from terrestrial radio broadcasts of sound recordings. But again, that doesn't happen here in the US. And again, because the US does not recognize this right in connection with terrestrial radio, if you are a US artist and your sound recordings are being broadcast on terrestrial radio in foreign countries, those royalties are going to accrue, but they're not going to be paid out to you because the US doesn't recognize this right, and we don't pay out artists from foreign countries these royalties either. So it's like, we're not being a good neighbor, so we're not going to get these neighboring rights royalties. A few notes on Sound Exchange. Sound Exchange, when money comes through Sound Exchange, those digital performance royalties are split amongst the featured artist, to session/background musicians, and to the copyright owner. And so 45% of these royalties go to the featured artist. Now, understand that in terms of producers, the producer's share of these royalties are paid out from the artist's share based on whatever agreement the artist has in place with the producer. And artists can actually submit letters of direction to Sound Exchange, informing them about the producer split. So then that way the producer is paid directly. So if you happen to be a producer and you're working with artists and you have agreements in place with artists, and maybe in the future you plan on working with more artists and you're going to be, giving them agreements, I highly suggest also including a letter of direction that they can sign that can then be sent to Sound Exchange. So then that way you as the producer can just get paid directly from Sound Exchange. So 5% of these royalties are paid to a fund for session/background musicians. And then the other 50% is paid out to the copyright owner of the sound recording, as in the label. Note that Sound Exchange does hold on to these royalties for 3 years. So if you are not registered with Sound Exchange and you have music up on Pandora or Sirius, go and register. So then that way you can collect these royalties. Also, Sound Exchange does have agreements in place with counterpart organizations outside of the US that covers 80% of the neighboring rights market. And in order to collect these royalties, you will need to find and fill out and submit the Sound Exchange International Mandate Form. And if you just Google Sound Exchange International Mandate Form, you should find that pretty quickly, and you can fill that out and submit that to Sound Exchange. So when you're going and registering with Sound Exchange, I found that a lot of the time artists are wearing not only the artist hat, but they're also wearing the record label hat, where they own their own sound recordings, they're self-releasing, they're using some sort of aggregator. So they're functioning as both the performer and the sound recording owner, which is the label. And oftentimes I found that artists are just registering with Sound Exchange as a performer and are not also registering as a sound recording owner as well. So if you happen to be one of these artists who are wearing both hats, right, you're going to want to make sure that you are registered as both. And so you'll see here on the screen that they do give you the option of registering as a performer, as a sound recording owner, or both. So if you haven't registered with Sound Exchange to date and you are both a performer and sound recording owner, go ahead and register as both. If you have only registered as a performer, then go back in and also register as a sound recording owner. Because if you don't, then you're leaving 50% of your digital performance royalties on the table. And every penny counts. So this is an area that I find really interesting. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I think it's really important for artists and songwriters to really be aware of the economic realities of streaming. This table right here was taken from materials on the Union of Allied Workers and Musicians website, and they sourced some of these figures from their own members, along with statistics from the Tricordist Streaming Bible and a few other areas. And as someone who has also gone through royalty statements from labels, from clients who use aggregators, I can say that these are just about right. So one thing that I find interesting is by looking at the total artist stream rate or total average artist stream rate, and you look at 2019 and 2020 with Spotify, you'll see that for the year of 2019, the average artist per stream rate was 0.0037 cents. And then when you move to 2020, that number actually reduced down to 0.00307 cents. And that being the case, because ultimately, as each day goes by, more music is included in Spotify. And also it might be the case that maybe some people weren't subscribing, weren't actually paying the subscriber fees, and were instead just using like the ad-supported version of Spotify. Now, when you look at the second part of the chart, where they actually do the calculations of, okay, how many streams does it take to make $1? And you look at Spotify's figures from 2019, you'll see that it took about 270 streams to make $1. 2020, it took about 325. And so you can do this with all the various services. I think it's just really interesting to do. And, when you're going through your statements, it's useful to compare your statements with these figures. Now, when it comes to how the streaming services pay royalties, they pay via like a pro rata market share model. And basically this means that the streaming service is pooling the money that is generated and then paying out artists by their share of total streams. Now, there is another payout model that has been discussed now for about a decade. And it is referred to as the user-centric model, which means that essentially fans and subscribers are paying for the artist whose music that they're listening to. So, for example, let's say that I pay a $10 subscription fee a month. My $10 is then split amongst the artists whose music I'm listening to over that month period. So a lot of streaming services say, well, this would just be too complicated to do. We don't want to do this. Note that SoundCloud actually in the last year has implemented this structure. And Medea Research actually last night just released a white paper on this experiment from SoundCloud. I haven't had a chance to dive into it, but the figures show that this method, the user-centric method, actually can really benefit independent artists because they have loyal fans who are listening to their music. And then that way their $10, the loyal fans' $10, is actually driving more towards the specific artist they listen to, as opposed to getting pretty much drowned out by the millions of people who are using Spotify and the millions of streams, billions of streams that are occurring on the platform. So I know that was kind of an aside, but I think it's really interesting. I also wanted to briefly mention about the use of sound recordings in audiovisual works. If a party is wanting to use a sound recording in a film, a TV show, commercial, video games, that party is going to need a master use license from the label. As I discussed in the last webinar about sync licenses and sync fees, the terms, the fees are just going to vary based on a variety of factors. And this fee is either paid to the label or, in the event the artist is wearing the label hat, to the artist directly. So let's move on to the aggregators. So what is a distribution aggregator? An aggregator works as an intermediary between an artist and the digital platforms like Spotify, Apple, Tidal, Deezer, etc. Because keep in mind, you as an artist, you can't just directly upload your music to Spotify and these other streaming platforms. These aggregators also might offer other services like social media, monetization of music. Some also offer certain marketing services as well. And they basically come in the form of packages that you can just add on to your distribution services. The aggregators I'm going to be talking about today are CD Baby, TuneCore, and DistroKid. And I've selected these three because they're the main ones that people use. These are aggregators that my clients have used. And so we're just going to focus on these three. Now, because a couple of people have emailed me some questions asking, well, what about the Orchard? Is the Orchard an aggregator? Is AWOL an aggregator? Keep in mind that there are the CD Babies, TuneCores, and DistroKids of the world, which are just available to anyone. But there are also more selective aggregators that really fall more in the realm of like maybe a distributor, maybe leaning more towards a label. So you have the Orchard and AWOL. Those two companies are owned by Sony. And then you also have Believe as another example, and Believe owns TuneCore. So with respect to the Orchard and AWOL, and maybe even Believe, usually they're going to take a higher commission than some of these other aggregators like a CD Baby. Now, I have never had anyone actually tell me what the Orchard's commission is. Never been able to get that number. But at least from my understanding, these commissions are a little bit higher than some of the other aggregators. But they offer some other sorts of more label services. And one thing to keep in mind too is because they're under the Sony umbrella, if an artist happens to be doing really, really well with the Orchard or with AWOL, it might be that Sony might take notice. So again, these aggregators are here to get your music out to the streaming platforms and to help you get your music out on social media as well. Now, no one of these aggregators, CD Baby, TuneCore, DistroKid, has a better deal with the streaming services than the other. At least that's what I was told by some of the higher ups at these various companies. So it's not like TuneCore has a better deal with Spotify or CD Baby has a better deal with Apple. So that's just something to keep in mind here. And which one is the best? This is a question that I'm constantly asked. And the answer is the old law school answer, it depends, which is never really satisfying to anyone. But really just know that depending upon your needs and your preferences, your best might be different than someone else's. So let's look at and compare and contrast some of the terms and features here. So with CD Baby charges a distribution fee of $29.95 an album, $9.95 a single. Now they don't do annual renewal fees. With TuneCore, I am really happy that I actually came back and went through and made sure that all of my information in these slides was up to date a couple of days ago, because literally within the last couple of weeks, TuneCore has changed its pricing models. Whereas TuneCore used to be like $49.99 a year for an album and I think $10 a year for a single, they've now adopted more of a DistroKid kind of practice, whereby they're just doing yearly subscriptions for unlimited music. Now with their pricing models, they have different tiers, rising artist, breakout artist, and professional. And each of these tiers have different yearly fees. when you look at their website, they do offer like a compare and contrast of, okay, well, what does professional offer that Breakout and Rising doesn't? And the main differences that I saw were just like response time to questions. So like with professional, it was saying that a customer service representative would respond to a question within like 24 hours, whereas these other lower amount tiers, it might take a little bit longer time. And with some of the lower tiers, maybe the reports wouldn't be like as detailed. So it's just something to keep in mind here that TuneCore has revamped its pricing models. And so if you happen to have already been using TuneCore and you're like, oh, I did not even know this, you might want to just reach out to someone at TuneCore and just ask and maybe figure out which one of these pricing models, which one of these thresholds you should actually go ahead and use. And if you happen to have not released any music on TuneCore and you're thinking about it, again, reach out to their customer support and just ask them, well, do you think that I should use the breakout feature versus the professional feature? Or what is, when you're saying that there are more detailed reports in one than the other, what is exactly does that mean? So I would just pose those questions to them. Now, DistroKid also offers, like they have for quite a few years now, basically $19.99 a year for unlimited singles and albums. And then if we're talking about like 2 bands or 2 artists, then that fee is going to increase. Now, the term of these agreements with CD Baby, either party can terminate with 24 hours notice. With TuneCore, it says that either party can terminate, but it doesn't go exactly into the specifics. So I would say just reach out to customer support if you're wanting to terminate for some reason. With DistroKid, you're locked into a 1-year term that then renews each year unless you've terminated before the end of that applicable year. Now, in terms of physical distribution, CD Baby does offer distribution of like CDs and vinyl. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, they're not going to be just distributing CDs and vinyl of yours to various stores without the actual record stores requesting it. So it's not like they're just going to, on a whim, just get your music out there to the various record stores. It's just that in the event that a record store wanted your music, they'd be able to distribute it to them. With TuneCore doesn't offer physical distribution services. However, they can duplicate CDs. So just keep that in mind that if you were wanting CDs duplicated, they could do that, but they don't actually distribute physical product to stores. And with DistroKid is just purely a digital distribution company. Now, in terms of commissions, with TuneCore and DistroKid, they don't take a commission. They pay out 100% of the net receipts. And so generally that's just going to mean 100% of whatever they collect, less maybe like some taxes. Now, CD Baby, on the other hand, they do take a commission. They take a commission of 9% of the gross receipts. And then they say that they pay out 91% of the net wholesale price actually received by CD Baby. My kind of issue with this is I don't think they really clearly define what net wholesale price means, but that's just something to keep in mind here, that whereas TuneCore and DistroKid do not take a commission, CD Baby does. CD Baby also collects sound exchange royalties unless you opt out. And I say to you, please opt out, because these are royalties that you can collect directly from Sound Exchange. It's fairly easy to register with Sound Exchange. And so the last thing that you want is for some middleman that's really not doing much work, that you could, do this work, taking a commission. So just keep that in mind here too, that if you're thinking about using CD Baby, I highly suggest to opt out of Sound Exchange collections. Another area that I found important to some artists is the feature of payment splitting. So CD Baby and TuneCore don't offer payment splitting. TuneCore says on their website coming soon. So I assume that at some point in the future, they're going to offer payment splitting. But with DistroKid, they do offer that. And but just keep in mind that, let's say you're a band and you want the various band members to be able to get their relative splits of the revenue from DistroKid directly, that those particular band members are going to need to sign up with DistroKid and pay a $20 a year fee. And so honestly, for a lot of bands, if you happen to not be collecting a lot of money, it might not make sense to sign up for this feature. DistroKid has also recently incorporated a recoupment info feature, whereby, let's say that band member 1 ends up putting forward $25,000 to record an EP and market it and get it out there. And band member number 1 has an agreement in place with all the other band members, whereby any of the money that comes in will go towards band member number 1 getting his money back. And then at the point at which profits are realized, that it's split up. So DistroKid does allow for you to put that information in there and then pay out the parties accordingly. So that is just something to keep in mind if you really care about that kind of customization. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about was sound recording metadata for releases, just because this is an area that I find a lot of people find confusing because, well, it is. So you have the ISRC, which is a unique code that is assigned by a label, distributor, or sound recording owner to a specific sound recording. In other words, every sound recording is going to have its own ISRC number. You also have the UPC, which is a unique code used to identify a product, like an album or a single or an EP. Understand that your label, if you're signed with a label or you've engaged a distributor or you're using an aggregator, can issue these codes to you. CD Baby does charge a fee to get the UPC. I think it's like $20 for an album, $4 or $5 for a single. TuneCore and DistroKid do not charge for the UPCs. CD Baby, TuneCore, and DistroKid do not charge to issue out the ISRCs. And CD Baby, TuneCore, and DistroKid, because this question came up the last presentation, they don't register works with Nielsen SoundScan. SoundScan has been rebranded within the last couple of months to Luminate, but no one's really using Luminate, so I'm just going to say SoundScan. SoundScan is a tracking system that is run by MRC Data, and it tracks the sales of music throughout the US and Canada. And so this data is collected from like a variety of retail outlets, online stores, streaming services, and the like. And just understand that you can't make the Billboard charts without registering your releases with SoundScan. So CD Baby, their website and their FAQs, there was some contradictory information as to whether or not they registered works with SoundScan. So I'm just going to say they're not, unless maybe you hear differently. And TuneCore and DistroKid on their websites, they said that they don't. So that's something that you would want to do if you want, to be at some point eligible for the Billboard charts based upon your data. And so you can go online to the SoundScan website and do that and provide to them the ISRCs and the UPCs that have been issued to you from your aggregator. So some of the major takeaways here as it pertains to these aggregators. If an artist is just looking for a one-stop shop for digital and physical distribution, it might make sense to use CD Baby because, well, the other two don't offer physical distribution. DistroKid is the cheapest, well, it has been traditionally the cheapest option, but now it's like there's not that much of a difference because of TuneCore's new pricing structures. And one thing that you'll also notice when we get to talking about the social media monetization, there are extra fees that DistroKid charges for doing that work. So honestly, at the end of the day, it's almost like TuneCore might be cheaper. So that's just something to think about. So if you are just looking for the cheapest option, then maybe it's DistroKid, maybe it's TuneCore. CD Baby does take a 9% commission of revenue. and TuneCore and DistroKid charge annual fees. So let's say an artist is making a significant amount of money. A 9% commission is probably going to look less attractive than a yearly fee of like $20 or $25, whatever the case might be. Finally, CD Baby does have the exclusive right to administer works on SoundExchange unless the artist opts out. And like I mentioned earlier, if you are an artist and you're using CD Baby, make sure you opt out of SoundExchange collections because you can register and collect your digital public performance royalties for sound recordings with SoundExchange. So next we are going to move on to social media monetization. So we did talk last webinar quite a bit about social media monetization of music, and I spent quite a bit of time talking about the underlying tech and how the tech works at YouTube and then some of these other companies. So I'm not going to get back into that much detail. So if you happen to just be tuning into this, you haven't watched the last presentation, I highly suggest going back if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about the underlying tech at these various services. So with YouTube, if you're an artist and you've set up an artist channel on YouTube, understand that you're not going to be able to monetize, you're not going to be able to earn revenue from your channel unless you have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 total hours of watch time over a 12-month period. These are hard thresholds to meet, and kind of almost impossible if you're not constantly pumping out new videos, new content on YouTube. Now, if you are a self-releasing artist, you have to use an aggregator in order to collect any revenue in connection with user-generated content on YouTube. So user-generated content being like ad revenue that is accrued whenever third parties use your music in their videos and ads are run on those videos. Note that the aggregators will deliver reference files which represent your recordings to YouTube's Content ID system. And if you use the aggregators for their publishing services too, then they'll also input the data relating to your songs into the YouTube Content ID system as well. These aggregators, they take a commission on revenue that's collected. And one other thing I wanted to mention with respect to YouTube is the concept of whitelisting, which means excluding your YouTube channel from monetization. Ultimately, if you have a YouTube channel and you've hit these monetization thresholds, as in you have 1,000 subscribers, 4,000 total hours of watch time over a 12-month period, ads are being run on your videos, you can collect that ad revenue directly from YouTube, from your channel. So if you're using one of these aggregators, the aggregator is also going to be collecting from your channel as well. But if you want to exclude them from doing that, you can do what is known as whitelisting. And so TuneCore and DistroKid offer whitelisting of your YouTube channels, and CD Baby doesn't explicitly allow whitelisting, at least from what I've heard from various friends and clients who tried to do it. They basically had to reach out to CD Baby support and then basically do it on like a video by video basis, and it was kind of difficult to deal with. So that's just something to keep in mind there. Note ad revenue splits on YouTube. When ads are run on videos, YouTube retains 45% of that ad revenue, and then the remaining 55% is passed on to the creator. So in the case of a music video, 30% of the ad revenue goes to the owner of the sound recording, 15% goes to the owner of the song, and 10% goes to the owner of the video, which is usually also the owner of the sound recording. Now, when it's not a music video kind of scenario, these percentages are probably going to vary. And when there's a lot of different music in a video, these percentages are going to vary as well. But unfortunately, these tech companies are not known for their transparency. So how they go about further splitting up the ad revenue out of the 55% is honestly kind of a mystery. So when it comes to YouTube and then the other social media services and the various aggregator policies related to these services, CD Baby takes a 30% commission of net income received from both the sound recordings and the songs. They don't charge like an extra cost to do this. With TuneCore, they charge 20% of gross receipts from the sound recordings, 20% of gross receipts from the songs, and they don't charge like an extra cost. With DistroKid, they take a 20% commission from revenue received from the sound recordings, because remember, DistroKid is just a distributor. They don't deal with publishing. But they also have an extra fee that you have to pay in order to use these services. So like I said, when you start comparing the price point for DistroKid versus TuneCore, it starts looking like TuneCore actually might be a little cheaper. With respect to track eligibility for YouTube monetization and monetization for other social media platforms, you'll note that these various aggregators will not allow covers to be submitted to YouTube for monetization, and that also includes covers of public domain works. Further, if you look at their terms, you cannot also submit recordings that include samples from like libraries or beat stores, even if you have a license in place with that library and or beat store. Now, with respect to Facebook, went ahead too quickly. So CD Baby, TuneCore, and DistroKid all have agreements in place with Meta, the parent company of Facebook, Instagram. And so if you want your fans to be able to use your music on Facebook and Instagram, you have to use an aggregator to get your music out there. Now, with respect to the deals that Meta has in place, or even when we get to TikTok, same thing goes with TikTok, has in place with labels and publishers. These deals are buyout deals, as in the service. So like Meta basically says, hello, record label, here is X amount of dollars that covers your entire catalog for X many years, as opposed to a revenue sharing deal like you see with the streaming services or with YouTube, whereby the labels, publishers, songwriters, artists are sharing in the revenue that is made on the platform. So because these are buyout deals, it does make it really hard for these companies, and then in turn, the aggregators or your label or your publisher, to then be able to really properly pay you as the artist or you as the songwriter based upon the consumption of your music. And this task is even harder when these social platforms don't even have solid content ID kind of technology. Because in those sorts of cases, then they're really not able to provide accurate usage reports. So all in all, it's just kind of a bad situation in terms of these buyout deals, because ultimately you're really not going to know if what you're being paid is accurate, particularly if these companies don't have YouTube content ID kind of tech, and they're not able to go out and really produce like accurate usage reports. To compound on that, I thought it'd be interesting to include in here CD Baby's language about how earnings are calculated from Facebook. And so you'll see here it says that CD Baby calculates earnings based on how many times a new video using that artist's music is created and posted on Facebook. They refer to that as a production event. Facebook's more detailed reporting begins once there are at least 100 production events for any particular track in a particular territory. CD Baby uses the average number 50 to report any uses of that track below the threshold. So if you see in your report a quantity of 50, the actual number of production events for that track might be between 1 to 99 in that territory. So again, this is just here to exhibit how much of a mess these calculations are, just from so many different levels, starting back with the particular social service. So yeah, just keep in mind here that don't really expect to see much money from these sources. And it's really mainly just here, and the aggregators provide these services. So then that way, if you're an artist and you want to get your music out there to your fans, so then they can use it in their reels or in their stories, you have an option to do so. One other thing I wanted to mention with respect to Facebook relates to live streaming and live streaming advice for artists. If you are an artist and you're planning on live streaming, please do not stream sound recordings that you do not own the rights to. This is more directed like towards DJs, because ultimately Facebook's their systems in place, their tech, which is Audible Magic, that actually, will block the use of recordings, will be able to pick up these recordings. And oftentimes your live stream will end up getting muted or will end up being taken down. And when that happens, you're probably also going to get some sort of strike. And then after so many strikes, then your Facebook page is gone, and then you don't have a way to communicate to your fans on Facebook or have to start over. So just keep in mind here that if you are live streaming on Facebook, and honestly any other sort of platform, don't stream sound recordings that you do not own the rights to. Finally, with TikTok, CD Baby, TuneCore, and DistroKid have agreements in place with TikTok. Same sort of deal like with Facebook. It's like a buyout deal. Ultimately, royalties are payable by users selecting your music for their video, not necessarily the amount of views that videos that contain your music might have. And again, really don't expect to see much money from these sources. The best circumstances that maybe your music's being included in a viral video, or a lot of people are including your music in their TikTok videos. And that leads to, increased streaming numbers. I can say that I do have a client who had a recording that just went just viral on TikTok. And that then really increased his Spotify numbers to the point where then he got a deal from a major label. So just know it is possible. The whole point of talking about TikTok, Facebook, Instagram isn't to say, oh, there's so much money that these services are paying out to artists and songwriters, because, well, they're not. Instead, the way how you kind of have to look at it, which is really, really unfortunate, is it's a way to amplify your music and to, hopefully get more people listening, more fans, which then translates to more streaming numbers, more fans that are maybe willing to go out and purchase tickets to your shows, buy merch, things of that nature. So with all that said, the final takeaways from this presentation: make sure that you're registered with SoundExchange. If you are registered with SoundExchange as a performer and you also happen to be the copyright owner, make sure that you register also as the copyright owner of the sound recording. In terms of aggregators, if an artist is looking for a one-stop shop for digital and physical distribution, I say probably makes sense to go with CD Baby. But if you're looking at just the cheapest option, then consider TuneCore or DistroKid. If you are currently using TuneCore and you don't know how these new pricing structures are going to affect you, I suggest reaching out to their support and just asking them some questions about how these new pricing structures are going to work. Further, with CD Baby, they do take a 9% commission from revenue, and they do charge a per album and per single fee. So if an artist really is making significant money, probably a 9% cut is not going to look that attractive. And a yearly subscription fee, like to a TuneCore or a DistroKid, might be the better route to go. Further, I know I've now mentioned this twice, so this means 3 times. CD Baby does have the exclusive right to administer works on SoundExchange unless the artist opts out. So just make sure that you opt out, because you can just collect these monies yourself. And, further, you're going to need to use an aggregator if you're a self-releasing artist, if you're wanting to get your music out there on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, these social platforms. So with all of that said, I hope that has been helpful. Okay, so let's start looking at some of these questions. I see this question here from Corbin Young. My mouse is not wanting to work right now. Hold on, Corbin. There we go. How do background musicians get paid from Sound Exchange? Is a letter of direction required? So with respect to the background and session musicians, I know that if the particular recording was released by a label that has registered with the American Federation of Musicians and SAG-AFTRA, that then at that point, these royalties are available in the fund. Now, I honestly haven't worked with many background or session musicians, so I can't tell you the exact answer, but I highly suggest, because Sound Exchange has really awesome customer support, why don't you reach out to them and just ask them, how we get paid. I do know that if the recording was released by a label registered with AFM and SAG-AFTRA, that you are entitled to these royalties, but why don't you contact Sound Exchange? Let's see what else. I think that is the only question. Oh, Elisa, I don't think I can hear you. I think you're muted.
Sorry, thanks. I had a question about the opting out of CD Baby for Sound Exchange. Do you review, if you cover this, like how much are they taking to do that? And are you making more money yourself if you choose to do that yourself?
So with CD Baby, their 9% commission is across all areas. So it would be that they were taking like 9%.
So you would be able to collect a little bit more money that way.
Correct.
Yourself. Okay.
There's another question.
You've got a question that just came up. You got it.
What aggregator do you recommend if an artist or label wants to release a remake or a cover of an existing work? So I know that CD Baby, they don't offer like cover song licensing, but they do point users to Easy Song licensing. And I know that TuneCore and DistroKid also offer this service. So just keep in mind that some of these aggregators do offer cover song licensing, but that would really only pertain to if you were releasing this cover via download or via physical format, because with the passage of the Music Monetization Act, it established the MLC, which is responsible for issuing blanket licenses to the streaming services and collects and pays out mechanical royalties from the streaming services to music publishers and to self-administered songwriters. And so you don't actually have to go to the music publisher and get a mechanical license to release a cover if we're just talking about streaming. I hope that answered your question. So one thing I also want to mention, I'll put this in the chat here. If you do have questions that just pop up, feel free to send an email to legal@talaarts.org and get your questions answered.
Great. Thank you so much, Gwen, for all the information you shared tonight. And I wanted to give a shout out to Ron, who is our production person working behind the scenes this evening. And thanks to everyone for joining us. And just a reminder, if you've got legal questions at all, doesn't have to be about anything we discussed tonight. If there's some other burning legal question on your mind, then you can call us on August the 2nd, starting at 5:30 until 7:30, and we'll get you hooked up with a Tala volunteer. And I think that's all for tonight. And thanks for joining us.
Thanks.